Chiori kit info and 4.6 artifacts. Sus. Chiori does not have a Geo Construct. This game sucks. Chiori sucks. Fuck this game. I hate it. Is an off-field support, not really synced with Navia, most synced with Albedo. Her E is similar to Goro's Q when herself or teammates damage enemies, additionally cause an instance of Geo damage. Q buffs entire party depending on amount of crystallizes inside the domain and number of Geo Constructs. Okay, wait! That's Pog. Wait, that's actually Pog. Wait, wait. Chat, hold your champs. Hold your pauses. Hold. Chat, I want you to hold. So realistically, what could a kit like this be? Yeah, so her E is probably just something similar to Raiden with like coordinated attacks, right? But only on Geo damage. Or maybe I guess she's kind of just like Nahida, right? She's basically just Nahida, but Geo. An E that deals additional damage when you deal Geo damage instead of when you trigger reactions, and that buffs your party based on your Geo stuff instead of buffing your elemental reactions. No, Zajef, you must not like Chiori. Your curse will activate again. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. I can't help it. This is a good sign. If it's real, I don't know if it's real, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a sus leak, right? But if it's real, this is an interesting kit. Wait, why are you guys saying the X.5 curse? Has it really been that bad? That's not that bad. Yai isn't bad. Okay, yeah. That one. That one. She was back then. She wasn't bad. She just wasn't amazing. Like, she was whatever. She wasn't Dea or Illa level, though. That's for sure. Like, Yai Taser is still fine, chat. It's not great. It's not her best team. But it's fine. She had high expectations. Yeah, I guess she definitely fell short of expectations. Yeah, hopefully Chiori's a Yai, not a Dea. Let's see what people have to say about the kit. It's Itover. Ito Construct doesn't break on bosses as easily as Albedo, so it's a W. Is it? Does Ito's Construct, or does Ushi count as a Construct even? I feel like it doesn't. He does? I'm pretty sure he doesn't resonate with bosses push Ito away. Bosses push Baron Bunny away, but that's not, Baron Bunny's not a construct. Ushi resonates? Really? He does? Huh. Okay. Well, that's good then. Yeah, I think people are not realizing the thing here, right? They're saying if Chiori doesn't make the set Geo Constructs more sturdy to last longer against elites and bosses, then a part of her Q buff is going to disappear with like 3 to 5 seconds after she casts.
It comes in many flavors to the discerning.
It doesn't matter how sturdy they are, right? Because what makes Constructs Omega fucking cringe against bosses isn't them being destroyed by damage. It's them being destroyed by the boss's hitbox going over them and the game being coded in a way where that's not supposed to happen, so it just makes the construct disappear. Not even destroyed, just disappear. Right, so you don't get GeoMC's Constellation 2 to proc, right? Yeah, that's fair. There's also a bunch of fake floors where you just can't put constructs. But I do agree that if she... Because, okay, from this leak, right, I think that it's probably how many are active when she activates the ability. But if it's not, if you need to maintain your constructs alive, it will be Omega fucking cringe. Like, that is a fair take. It'll be very fucking cringe. How does she not sync with Navia if she buffs based on Crystallize? Well, considering the fact that they said that she works well with Albedo, I'm guessing it's a fucking defense buff. That would be a very likely way that it would not synergize with Navia. It sounds like the crystals mustn't be consumed for the buff. That's not true. There's no verb here, right? Depending on amount of crystallizes inside the domain and number of Geo Constructs, right? So you're kind of left guessing what they actually mean by this. Is it the amount of crystallizes that are present at any given time? Is it a dynamic buff that works like that? Is it the amount of crystallizes that are present when you cast the ability? Is it a non-dynamic buff that works like that? Is this the amount of crystallizes that you generate inside the domain? Which would mean that it would not change anything whether you actually catch them or not, right? You're kind of left wondering what they actually mean by this, but it definitely does not exclude the possibility of it just being the amount you generate. Because it could be the amount that characters inside the domain generate, rather than the amounts that are present at a given time inside the domain, right? So, okay, let me just quickly talk about the sort of thing I would like to see from Chiori. Right, I've talked about this before a little bit, but we can get into it a bit more, right? The current state of Geo is kind of dog shit. And it's mostly because... And yeah, right, this is something I talk about fairly often, but still. When you look at characters like Navia, right? Which I've said before is like not a real Geo character, right? Like she's artificially Geo. She's aesthetically Geo, but functionally not. Right? What kind of units does she want to be played with? Well, having one other Geo unit isn't bad, but you never want more than one. And outside of that, what you want is characters like Bennett, characters like Farina, characters like Shailene. Shut up, please. Right? Which gives her a lot of options, which means a character like Navia doesn't really have any problems. Right? She doesn't have anything that needs to be fixed. She is completely functional. And then you look at a character like Ito. And a character... And you see, okay, what does he want to be played with? Well, he kind of needs some Geo energy generation. He's got a defense buff. Okay, he wants to be played with Goro. What does Goro want to be played with? More Geo units. Okay, let's say you're doing Ito, Goro, Zhongli, or Ito, Goro, Albedo. What's your last slot? Do you go for, like, a synergistic unit from another element? Okay, sure. Like who? And then you realize, oh, there is no other synergistic unit for that last slot. All the units they want are Geo. Farina? Who's healing for your Farina? Goro doesn't heal enough. Bennett, I mean, Bennett's cool and all, but your carry has 5,000 attack already, so Bennett isn't a huge fucking deal. I have C6 Farina, I mean, sure, I guess. Yelan? Yeah, Yelan is a good option, even though she fucking sucks in the slot. Because you're doing like most of your damage is charge attacks. So you end up just playing Zhongli, and now you have a fucking team where all you want is Geo units,
wine tastes the
where not a single one of these units can be swapped for another one. Noelle, I mean, I guess you can replace Ito with Noelle. That's like the one change here, right? But that's not Noelle's best team. You can't replace anyone with Neng, you can't replace anyone with Yunjin. You technically have two variations, but it's two variations on the carry, not even on the supports. If you want to play a Geo carry, you end up basically needing either two of these three, plus one random-ass fucking character that isn't very synergistic, or all three of them. Which makes it so that when you look at Navia's teams, right? She doesn't struggle to find synergistic teammates. While she would be more synergistic with a Ningguang that's actually good, right? Like, fair, but she has good teams. Ito, on the other hand, has like one team with no fucking variations on it. If you don't have either of these, you kind of get fucked. If you don't, like, okay, cool. It sucks to be you, I guess. What are you gonna play, Geo MC? And so, because of that, in my opinion, what Geo needs right now is more units that are synergistic with Goro. Whether it's other Geo units, or even just fucking defense scalers like Albedo from another element, I think that what Geo needs right now is units that can capitalize on Goro's buff. That you have an incentive to play over John Lee or Albedo in that 4th slot. 4 Geo units make Albedo's EM boost more useless. Albedo's EM boost is already useless because it's on an ability. You only get it when you use his burst, and his burst fucking sucks. You don't want to use your burst on Albedo. Unless you're playing a team that actually has the, like, time to spare. When you're playing, like, I don't know, a fucking quick swap Zhongli team. 12-second rotation bullshit, like, sure. If you have the time to do it without losing uptime on anyone else, sure. But outside of that, it's just not a very good ability. Anyways, all of this to say, right? I want more units that synergize with Goro. So either units that can capitalize on his defense buff, or units that give similar buffs to Goro that will be played in the same teams. Either again, right? Either something that can capitalize on Goro's buff, a bit like Fischl does in Hyper Raiden teams, right? You can play Fischl in the last slot because Fischl can capitalize on Bennett and Kazuha's buff. Or I guess now Bennett and I guess, well, it wouldn't be Bennett. Just on Chevreuse's buff, right? Like, you can play Fischl in that slot because she capitalizes on those buffs. Or you can have a unit like Sarah. And again, right, I don't like Sarah. I don't think she's good, and I don't think she's particularly healthy for the game. But also, from a design standpoint, characters like Sarah are good to have in the game. Goro is Geo Sarah? Kinda, yeah. I think that in the teams where you use Goro, he fulfills Bennett's job more so than Sarah's job. Even though he does have a kid that's very similar to Sarah. But yeah, so you'd either want a character like Sarah that can kind of do half and half of both capitalizing on the buffs you already get in your team, right? Because Sarah's burst is actually it's not an insanely high damage ability, but it's not low damage either, right? Like, you have to use her burst to get your buff anyways. So it's gonna have to be used with your Bennett uptime anyways, and your Kazuha uptime. And so at that point, it is benefiting from those buffs. And even though it's not as much damage as Fischl, you will build her for damage, because you don't have anything else to build her for. And it will do a reasonable amount of damage, right? If you look at... And again, right? Always take GC Sim stuff with a grain of salt for, like, the overall total damage the team is doing. But my favorite thing about GC Sim is looking at damage distribution. I think that's the one thing from GC Sim that you can almost always just effectively take at face value. With the caveat that Animo units deal less damage than they should because it's almost always single target. But anyways, if I look at Raiden, Sarah, right? In a team like this, Sarah is doing a non-insignificant portion of damage. It's not nearly as high as Raiden, obviously, but it is non-insignificant. Goro, on the other hand, doesn't really do damage. His damage is so insignificant in Geo teams. Joro. His damage is so insignificant in Geo teams that people run him on a 4-star set. Just because Exile's effect is more important than anything he can actually do in terms of damage. Right? Again, Goro is more so acting like Bennett in those teams. He's just there to be a buff. If I open... Oh, I actually don't have an Excel thing open. I guess that's because my computer crashed yesterday. Omega. But yeah, so when you have Raiden, Bennett, Kazuha, Fischl, right? What you have is like your carry, pure buff, buff plus damage, and then damage that can capitalize on both of these buffs, right? When you have Raiden, Bennett, Kazuha, Sarah, you have carry, pure buff, buff plus damage, and then here you have, again, buff plus damage. But this damage can capitalize on these two buffs, which means that even it doesn't need to be a large amount of damage to be a large amount of damage, right? It doesn't need to be a high amount of motion value. It doesn't need to be a broken ability to end up doing a lot of damage in your team. When you look at Ito teams, you have Ito, Goro, and then first let's look at Albedo Zhongli, right? You have your carry, pure buff, damage, and then pure buff. The thing is, Albedo's actual damage output isn't that great, right? And more importantly, Zhongli's pure buff is not very good. It's a pure buff, but he's mostly there for defensive utility, and because you don't have a good last slot. So what you end up with is, well, really just a shit version of this, right? In terms of the roles the units are fulfilling in the team. What I like to see is carry, pure buff, buff plus damage. Right? We have Ito. We have Goro. We're missing something here. And then you can put either Zhongli for pure buff as a last slot, or Albedo. Right? That's one of the things that could help Geo feel a lot better. And that's why people use Yelan in this slot. Because Yelan is technically buff plus damage. It's just that it's an incredibly unsynergistic buff plus damage unit with the team. And I'd like to see a more synergistic one. Does C6 Hyunjin count? No. It's not good for these teams. So, that's like the first way you could go about it. The second way you could go about it is to build them more like Wanderer teams, right? So in Wanderer teams, you have Wanderer, Bennett, Farazan, and then generally a defensive utility option. So like Toma or Zhongli or whatever, right? So you have damage, pure buff, and technically Farazan does damage, but her damage isn't high enough. I'm gonna call it pure buff, even though she technically does do a little bit of damage. And then you have buff plus defensive utility. Right? But what you have is things that are multiplicative with each other. Right? It's like 10 to 15% damage. Yeah, it's not that far behind Sarah does, but only if she's C6. If she's not C6, it's nothing, whereas Sarah does still do damage pre-C6. But, I mean, fine, whatever. It's still like, I'll call it, I won't say pure buff, but I'll call it, because like she's really mainly there for that. The way that a team like this functions is that it has buffs that are multiplicative with each other, right? An attack buff, a damage buff and res shred debuff, and a not getting hit buff. Not getting staggered buff, right? Where effectively the defensive utility in Wanderer's case is, I mean, it's not really necessary, but for most players will behave the same way that a damage buff does, in the sense that it's just going to let him, it's effectively kind of like Shenhe. You get additional motion value because instead of dodging and instead of getting staggered, you're hitting. right? And that is multiplicative with an attack buff, and it is multiplicative with a damage buff and a res shred debuff, right? So you effectively end up having 3 buffing characters that are synergistic with each other because they buff a different part of the kit that all get multiplied together at the end. Right? And that's why Wanderer's teams feel so cohesive. So you could also do something similar for Ito. You could have Ito, Goro, Zhongli. Right, so you have carry, I guess, yeah. Pure buff. Buff. And then a new character that is also just a buff. Goro gives a lot of small different buffs. So I don't think you can make something that's like truly multiplicative, but you could make something that's mostly multiplicative by just making it like a big damage percent buff. Or a big defense percent buff. Because again, right, what Goro does is he just gives a lot of small different buffs. Although his defense buff is the biggest one, so that's... Either way, right, that's another way that you can make Ito's teams feel more cohesive. And that's why it's sad that Goro's healing is so bad, because if Farina could fit there, she would be really fucking good. Anyways. All of this to say, right? When you look at this kit description, it makes me optimistic. It really does. Because she could very well fulfill either the pure buff if this damage isn't really big, or the damage plus buff category. I don't think it would necessarily be bad to just have a pure damage either, right? But it would need to fit in pre-existing Ito, Goro, Albedo, right? And then you have a pure buff that works well on your carry and then on both of your damage dealers. So I guess this, right, would be a lot more similar to a mono Hydro team where you have like Yelan. And the Hydro units are kind of busted, so a lot of them do something more than just damage. But like, I guess, yeah, Kokomi, Kazuha, Yelan, Singto, right? Or like, Yelan is giving you a buff, but it's only a buff to one character, and realistically, it just translates to a little bit more damage. It's not a significant buff. So, like, the way that your team is mostly functioning is carry, pure buff. Well, technically, Kazuha's buff plus damage, but, like, then damage, right? Like, you could make her kit function either as just buffs, as buffs plus damage, or as just damage. And I think it would be... The one I would like to see the most is buff plus damage. Something similar to Sarah, but, like, less cringe. I think that is the main thing that we that we should get. Something like Shenhe? No, not really. Not like just straight up something like Sarah. What's cringe about Sarah? She's dog shit before C6. What about Navia? I don't think she needs to work with Navia. Again, Navia's not really a Geo unit. She's not really meant to work with other Geo units that well. You won't at most one other Geo unit because she doesn't actually have synergy with Geo units. It's just that Geo Resonance is kind of good. Doesn't she want another Navia? Yeah, because she wants... Another Navia would be good, because you'd get your Geo Resonance without having to play any of the Geo units that actually do Geo things.